The woman who stole 2 acres of my farm stood at my gate and told me my goats were trespassing. Behind her sat a new swimming pool worth nearly $1 million, built in the middle of land my family had owned since 1964. I could have stopped her that morning, but I had learned something about people like Denise Holloway. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is let them keep digging. My name is Grant Mercer. I am 56, and I live outside Red Bluff, Kansas, on 160 acres of pasture my father bought after coming home from Vietnam. It is not fancy land, just wind-bent cottonwoods, a red barn, and 2 spring-fed ponds. My wife Clara used to say the sunsets out there could forgive almost anything. She was the one who brought goats onto the place, starting with 5 stubborn Nubian does, then building them into a herd of 48 and a small business selling goat milk soap, lotion, and cheese at weekend markets. Clara died 4 years ago after a short fight with pancreatic cancer. And I kept every animal, every recipe card, and every crooked little label she designed at our kitchen table. People assumed I kept the farm because I was sentimental. They were right. What they did not understand was that grief can make a man quiet without making him weak. The trouble began when a developer named Victor Holloway bought the wheat ground west of me and built Cedar Crest Reserve, 36 oversized houses with 3-car garages, fake stone chimneys, and an entrance sign tall enough to block the sunrise. Victor's wife, Denise, became HOA president before the first family had finished unpacking. She drove a black Range Rover, wore white clothes to construction sites, and carried a leather folder like it contained the 10 Commandments. The first time she came to my gate, she looked past me at the herd and said, "Mr. Mercer, the odor from your animals is affecting our property values." I told her, "Ma'am, the goats were here before your street had a name." She smiled, slow and polished. Neighborhoods evolve. Responsible people evolve with them. 2 weeks later, while I was at an equipment auction in Wichita, Denise and Victor began building a private recreation club on my west pasture. I came home near dusk and saw bulldozer tracks through my grass, temporary fencing around my herd, and a concrete excavation where Clara used to bottle feed newborn kids. 48 goats had been pushed into dry ground with 1 empty trough. Denise stood beside the hole discussing imported tile with a contractor. When I asked what she thought she was doing, she barely looked surprised. "The board approved a pool," she said. "This parcel is community property." I asked for proof, and she handed me a subdivision map showing the Cedar Crest boundary running almost 200 feet into my farm. I studied it, handed it back, and said, "I will need a copy." Denise smiled again. "Of course. And while you are reviewing it, keep your livestock on your side of the line." I drove home without raising my voice, opened the steel cabinet in my office, and pulled out my father's deed, an old survey, and the county tax map. All 3 showed the same thing. That pool was sitting 157 feet inside my property. The next morning, I went to the county records office, and what I found there made me realize this was not a mistake. Someone had changed the map. The preliminary subdivision plan showed the boundary exactly where it had always been, along the old hedge line west of my pasture. But the final version filed 6 months later had been shifted east, just far enough to swallow the 2 acres where Denise was building her pool. I stood at the records counter staring at both maps while a clerk named Marjorie, who had known my family for 30 years, leaned closer and whispered, "Grant, lines do not move by themselves." I made certified copies, drove home, and placed them beside the deed in my steel cabinet. 2 days later, a lawyer representing Cedar Crest sent me a letter demanding that I remove my goats from HOA property within 72 hours or pay $400 a day in fines. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and went outside to feed the herd. Denise must have mistaken silence for surrender, because the complaints began the following week. Noise, odor, groundwater contamination, unsafe agricultural structures, even a claim that my cheese room was an illegal commercial factory. A county inspector named Earl Bishop came out with a clipboard and the tired eyes of a man who had already spent too many years dealing with rich people who thought government offices were personal weapons. Earl had worked with me back when I served as a county land use officer, so he knew I kept my operation cleaner than most restaurants. He measured setbacks, inspected drainage, checked manure storage, tested soil, and walked through the barn while one of Clara's oldest goats chewed the corner of his jacket. When he finished, he said, "Every complaint fails, not barely, completely." Then he looked toward the new subdivision and added, "Somebody is trying to bury you in paperwork." I told him, then they picked the wrong man. I used to read paperwork for a living. Denise's next move was more dangerous. I received notice that my agricultural tax classification was under review, which meant my yearly bill could jump from $3,800 to nearly $29,000. Victor Holloway sat on the county development board, and that was when I understood the real plan. They did not simply want the 2 acres. They wanted to make the entire farm too expensive for me to keep, buy it cheap, and turn Clara's pastures into another row of houses. I called an attorney named Rebecca Sloan, a woman with silver hair, sharp glasses, and the kind of calm voice that usually meant somebody else was about to have a very bad day. She listened without interrupting, then said, "Your farm existed before Cedar Crest. State right to farm protections apply. Your tax status is secure, and that deed is older than every document they have, but the altered map changes this from a boundary dispute into possible fraud." Rebecca advised me to hire a licensed surveyor, so I called Miles Rourke, who had been measuring Kansas land since before GPS units fit inside trucks. He arrived with 2 assistants and spent most of a day following iron markers set by my father and the previous owner. At sunset, he spread his notes across the hood of his pickup. "The pool, the deck, the pump house, and the new fence are all on your land," he said. "The closest part is still 157 feet inside your boundary." Then he showed me something worse. The coordinates on the final Cedar Crest map had been rewritten in a way designed to avoid the county's automatic overlap warning. Whoever changed them understood the system. Victor had not made a careless mistake, he had engineered one. Bulsha filed a quiet title action the next morning, asking the court to formally confirm my ownership, and she forwarded both maps to the district attorney. Meanwhile, the pool was completed with imported stone, underwater lighting, a cedar pavilion, and a bar long enough to serve half the county. Denise held a private preview party with champagne and live music, but I was not watching the guests. I was watching a white pipe running from the pump house into Miller Creek, the stream Clara's goats had used for years. 3 days after the pool filled, the herd stopped drinking downstream. Animals cannot read environmental regulations, but they know when water smells wrong. I collected samples, tested them, and found chlorine levels 12 times above the permitted limit. I photographed the discharge pipe and filed a report with the state environmental agency. By then, my evidence cabinet held the deed. 2 surveys, 2 versions of the map, dismissed complaints, the tax review, water tests, photographs, and Denise's threatening letters. Still, she kept pushing. She built a 6-foot fence around the pool, cutting the goats off from their regular path to the creek, then called me and said, "The fence stays. If your animals damage our facility, you will pay." I said, "You built it on my property." She laughed. "Your property is whatever the filed map says it is." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it frightened me, but because it told me exactly how certain she was that nobody would challenge her. A week later, Victor called and offered me $200,000 to sign away the land. When I refused, he raised it to $300,000. "Be practical, Grant," he said. "It is only 2 acres. I looked through the kitchen window at the pasture where Clara had taught newborn goats to drink from a bottle. Then you should have asked before stealing it," I said, and ended the call. What Victor did not know was that Rebecca had instructed me to record every conversation. His offer to purchase land he publicly claimed already belonged to him went straight to the district attorney. 3 days later, the judge denied Cedar Crest's request for an emergency order, barring me from the pool area, saying he would not protect an unpermitted structure apparently built on another man's farm. Denise responded by posting online that I was a bitter widower trying to destroy a family community. Residents threw trash over my fence, and 1 young goat nearly died after swallowing plastic. That night, sitting beside her in the barn while she trembled against my leg, whatever doubt I still had disappeared. The next morning, Rebecca called. The judge had ruled in my favor. The 2 acres were mine, the pool was an illegal encroachment, the environmental agency had issued a violation, and prosecutors had opened an investigation into Victor. Denise did not know any of that yet, and her grand opening was scheduled for Saturday. I walked outside, looked down the natural slope from my goat pen to the shining blue pool, then began building a gate. I spent Friday setting 2 steel posts into the old fence line and hanging a gate toward the pool. The ground sloped from the barn to the water, and for 3 nights I scattered alfalfa pellets down that path, not enough for a person to notice, just enough for 48 goats to remember. Saturday came warm, and by 10 o'clock, Cedar Crest looked like a wedding reception, with better financing. White tents, barbecue, a DJ, children in swimsuits, and Denise moving through the crowd in a cream dress with a microphone in one hand and champagne in the other. Victor stood near the ribbon with county officials, smiling like a man who believed money had rewritten history. Rebecca waited beside the sheriff's SUV with the court order, while several neighbors stood near the back as witnesses. At 11, Denise tapped the microphone and said, "Today proves what a determined community can accomplish." I opened the gate. Clara's oldest doe, Mabel, lifted her head, caught the scent of alfalfa, and trotted downhill. The rest followed, 10, 20, 30, then all 48 pouring across the pasture, bells rattling and hooves pounding like rain on a metal roof. Mabel reached the pool deck, knocked over a tray of shrimp, and jumped into the shallow end hard enough to soak a commissioner from the knees down. For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then the whole place came apart. Oates climbed onto lounge chairs, crawled beneath buffet tables, ate flowers, and wandered through the pavilion while children screamed with delight and adults screamed for different reasons. One young buck jumped onto the inflatable slide, and the DJ abandoned his equipment to film it. Denise dropped her champagne. "Get those animals out of our pool," she shouted. I walked down the hill carrying the deed, survey, environmental notice, and judge's ruling. "They are standing on my land," I said. She pointed at me, shaking. "You planned this. I opened a gate on my own pasture." They chose the destination. Victor demanded that the sheriff arrest me, but Rebecca handed the ruling to the commissioner and said, "The property was legally confirmed as belonging to Grant Mercer yesterday. Every structure here is an unauthorized encroachment." The commissioner read the first page, looked at Victor, then at the goats drinking from the pool, and lowered the ribbon. The story made the evening news before the last goat was back in the barn. Within a month, Cedar Crest was ordered to remove the pool, fence, pump house, and pavilion at its own expense. The HOA refunded every special assessment, paid an environmental fine, and nearly emptied its reserve fund. Victor resigned from the development board after prosecutors charged him over the altered map. Denise lost the presidency in a 32-4 vote and sold her house before winter. I used part of the settlement to build a covered farmer's market where the pool had been, naming it the Clara Mercer Community Market. Every Saturday, families from Cedar Crest came to buy eggs, honey, vegetables, and Clara's goat cheese. Some people called what I did petty, others called it justice. I still wonder where the line is. When someone uses money, influence, and humiliation to take what belongs to you, are you obligated to remain polite, or are there moments when opening the gate is the most honest thing a person can do? Tell me what you think in the comments. Share this story with someone who has dealt with an HOA that forgot its limits, and subscribe for more stories where ordinary people finally push back.